All right, so we'll dive in. Welcome to our coach office hours. Those of you who have never been here or attended one, each week we have um, different members of the team diving into different topics. So my name is Kai. I'll be sort of helping moderate for today. And I want to introduce Purple Patch coach John Stevens. So John will be leading us through some dry land swim training tips, techniques for getting back in the water, but also some more general aspects of the pool, open water swimming, and returning to swim through all of this. So we'll be open to questions at the end, but we may interject as it makes sense. So you can add them in the chat at the bottom, and we'll get to them throughout the video as it makes sense. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John, introducing himself and the topic for today, and a little bit about himself.
All right, thanks, guys, so much. Yeah, so Coach John Stevens. I am based in Maine, and it's a beautiful. Now, finally, summer's here, and maybe we can actually. For me, I haven't swum yet. I'm looking forward to getting into the open water here pretty soon, and so I think we're gonna. I talked to Scott, who's on here, is part of my, which is something I've been doing twice a week for the last few weeks here, about how well this swim band stuff that we've been doing is going to translate over. I come from a swimming background actually myself, and that was kind of my segue into triathlon was through swimming. So it's kind of my passion, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it and helping people get back into it. But I've also really enjoyed the swim band stuff. And basically what we're going to be talking about today a little bit is how the dryland training we've been doing the last couple of months, how these swim band sessions that we've been doing, we're going to talk about how these are going to translate into getting back into the pool, getting back into those open water swims. And what I would really like to push too at the end of this is not only has this helped you stay in shape and be ready to get back into swimming, but I think it's something that is just going to continue to be beneficial as we get back into the pool and keep swimming. Let's not drop these swim bands and drop this stuff that we've been doing, because it does hold some great for swimming in general. So basically, what we've been doing the last few months is we haven't been able to swim. We haven't been in the pool. We haven't been in the open water. Some people are starting to get back into that now, but the supplement to that has been these swim band sessions. And with that, what I think we're going to find is hopefully when you are able, or maybe you already have gotten back into some water and some swimming, you've noticed that swim specific strength is still there. I think the big thing, it's keeping that familiarity with what we've been doing with those motions, with those very specific swim muscles in the shoulders, the lats, working on those pulls. We're hopefully going to be able to see that as you get back in the water. Now, I think the feel is going to be the tricky thing. When you get back in, you're going to feel all slippery and slimy and stuff's going to be all over. But the idea is that what we've been doing is we've been working on that swim specific strength and keeping that familiarity. So when you get in, that motion isn't going to feel, that pull particularly isn't going to feel super foreign to you. The other big benefit that I've seen from swim bands is, and we've been working on this with the swim band classes, is it's so much easier to focus in on your stroke and the mechanics and exactly what you're doing. When you're in the water and you've got that displacement and everything's all over, you're having to come up and take a breath, your body's in these weird positions and you can't hold it. It's really hard to zero in on exactly what am I doing in this swim catch. You can't really see it, you can't really feel it. The big benefit with the swim bands has been you're anchored on dry land, it's solid, you can be right here and you can literally do these motions using the band's resistance to help feel particularly that catch. How's that going to feel through the middle? And then also one of the things we've been talking about in our swim band class a lot is this finish through the back end through here. And it helps you realize where you're holding water and where you're not. If you're using the swim bands that have the paddles on them, let me grab mine here real quick. So I got them. These ones with the paddles have been great because if you've noticed doing the swim band work, a little tangled here. Anyway, as you're pulling back, if this paddle isn't straight back from where that cord is pulling, see if I can fix it so this makes more sense. Sorry about that. You're going to feel your arm being pulled in a weird way. So what these bands have done is they've helped you dial in feel a little bit, even though you're not actually feeling the water, but exactly where that pressure should be and where you should be pushing. And so the idea is we're going to get back in the water and it's going to feel slippery and slimy. You know, the downside with the bands is when we do them, we're very squared up, and it's a very kind of non-rotational movement. Whereas we know when we're swimming, it's a side to side. It's more rotational. So it's going to be trying to figure out how to add those little things back in. And I think with a little time in the water, that's going to come back pretty quickly. But the idea here is that now with that swim specific strength, you're going to get in, and this isn't going to hurt so bad. You know, one of the ways I think the bands translate really, really well is think about that first open water swim you do each year. When you get in and you start going, and normally let's say you're in a 25-yard or 25-meter pool and you're doing 13 to 16 strokes, 18 strokes, maybe depending on how you're swimming. You get through those 13 to 18 and you're either doing a flip turn or you're doing an open turn. It's 2-3 seconds worth of a turn, but that's enough time for your shoulders to stop moving, stop working, and get that rest. So you know that first swim when you get in the open water and all of a sudden you're getting at like 20, 30 strokes straight. Some of you lucky folks that are in a 50-meter pool, it's a few more, but all of a sudden when you get to that point where you're past where there's a split turn, all of a sudden you start to think, man, my shoulders are really tired and getting really fatigued. And the swim bands help build up that resistance to that fatigue. I think it translates really, really well to open water swimming specifically, because it does put in that use. I mean, you don't have to do it very much. I think there's been a couple of times in the swim band classes that I've done where we've done a 2-minute interval, and that seems like forever. You know, even when we do the 1-minute intervals, if you do enough of them over time with short rest, they tend to add up pretty quickly. So we really get that shoulder fatigue worked in pretty well with the bands. And that translates, as I said, very well to open water. You know, the swim bands are one of those things that I have been doing them for years. Even though I'm swimming 4 or 5 times a week, I'm still doing the swim bands. And again, it's one of those things where I can focus very specifically on my stroke, what I'm doing. And it also allows me to get in a pretty hard workout in 20 to 30 minutes. You know, you don't have to go in and swim for an hour in a pool. You can knock out a swim band session in 30 minutes. A lot of the same benefits strength-wise as you would. And so one of the things I think what we really want people to know is as we start getting back in the pool and getting back into the water, and you may have seen the Return to Swim program, which we'll talk a little bit more about here later on, coming back into things, we don't want to just say, ditch the swim bands, let's get back in the pool, because there are a lot of benefits from those, like what we've been talking about right here, that you can carry in. So even with my one-to-one athletes who I have had getting back in the pool, I am still including at least one swim band session a week. And with that, what we're doing is we're getting very specific on it. You know, Matt Dixon had a daily bulletin not too long ago, so maybe at this point it was a few weeks ago. But with that, he talked about the catch portion of the stroke and using those swim bands on that catch portion. It's such an easy thing to do to get those bands on and just focus on from this catch here just to here, and just practice literally just keeping the elbow locked, dropping the hands down for that high elbow catch that we're always talking about. So it's an opportunity to focus on form. And you can even, I tell them stop. And if you're on on a computer, get a mirror. You know, if we're on the swim band class, I tell people stop what you're doing and watch yourself, and you can really see what you're doing, and it's easier to kind of get that feel for what's going on. So I think the big thing is try to squeeze in one of these swim band sessions a week as we keep going. A couple of those sessions, if you're on squad, the ones that have been in there, there's even some flutter kicking that we do. And I think, again, just like with the bands, where you're able to kind of just focus on what you're doing and how that feels. With the flutter kicking, it's the same thing. You know, with a kick in the swim, you want to have a very tight body, very tight core. Your legs are not, knees aren't bent, legs are relatively straight. The kick is coming from the hip. When you're laying on your back, and if it's in the streamline or your arms are on your side on the floor for a little bit of support, you can literally look down your body and see your legs kicking in front of you. And if you could see, just tight little kicks. And if your leg is coming too high off the ground, you're going to know it. If your knee is bending, you're going to know it. And it allows you just to dial in what you're doing a little bit more, get the feel for it on dry land, and then we translate that to the water. I guess at this point, Kai, I don't know if any questions have come through or if anyone does have any questions. I've been kind of yammering away here for 5-10 minutes, but this might be I've covered a lot. And before I go any further, I just want to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page here.
Yeah, one would be about so with the swim bands, say you don't have a bench or something, and we start to feel some low back tightness at the through those longer parts of the session. What are your remedies, or how should we go about working with that?
It's one of those things where you have to build into it a little bit, and that's particularly if when you first start doing the swim bands, it's getting that posture while we're doing these, and it's this idea that you want to be as horizontal to the ground as you can, just like when you're swimming. But as time goes on, that does start to wear on your lower back. So it's one of those things where I would suggest you build into it. If you're doing 1 minute intervals and you notice your back is starting to get tight 45 seconds into it, switch to 45-second intervals. Or, instead of doing, say it's something that's 5 times 1 minute, do 10 times 30 seconds and take that little extra rest to stand and just make sure you're stretching and kind of getting that mobility while you're in between these sessions. And I think also, let's think about what the core is on that, or what the cause is. It could be a weak core, it could be hamstrings, it could be glutes. So it may actually help you pinpoint another weakness, which is something that you could work on.
Awesome. And then thinking about breaking down the stroke throughout there. So you alluded to a little bit of just working on the catch portion. Are there any other specific parts of the pull or the swim stroke that you like to focus on in those, and any major benefits to those?
Absolutely. Give me 1 second. I'm actually going to hook my cords up here so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. 1 second. I had them for display, and I just got to get them rigged up here. Okay, so I'm going to flip you around. Hopefully the sun isn't too bad there. So one of the things we did talk about briefly was you were able to, I'm all tangled here, focus on specific parts of the stroke. And one of the things I like with the cords is if you get a little bit of resistance on them, you can get your hand right there, and it just does allow you to focus. One, there's the catch. We can come down to here. Let me see if I can fix this a little bit. Sorry, everybody, this is a new setup for me here. So let's see how this goes. So here's the arms up, and we just work on that catch. That's one of the main big focuses we can work on. But the other thing we can work on is coming through the back part. The catch, we've always talked about this elbow position being here, but the finish of the stroke, a lot of the times, particularly when we talk about swimming with a high tempo, what tends to happen is people simply move their arms faster. And by moving your arm faster, what you end up doing, move that more that way, is instead of finishing your stroke all the way through, parallel to your body here, what happens is people come here and you finish here. And you're losing out on that back third, that finish, that power part of the stroke. So what the cords is, sometimes we've done here is you can do some stuff where you're doing just the catch, just up front, and then you can focus on just the finish. It's literally a tricep press, basically, but body is flat, elbow is right even, and it's that little finish right at the end. And you're gonna know you're there because, as I said, this paddle is pushing straight back, straight back, straight back. And as soon as that paddle goes parallel this way, I can instantly feel it pulling back here. So you're keeping that tension perfect, and that last little flip is your note to kind of let that arm come back up. So the key parts of strokes here being the catch and the finish, you can dial in and you can practice just that catch, and you can practice just that finish portion where you're really, really engaging. Sorry guys, we try to get out of the sun here. Really, really trying to engage that tricep and that kind of flick through the back end of the stroke.
Excellent. That's really good to know. So with the strength work that we incorporate in, that doesn't count as dry land training, or do we incorporate it, or do you really like it to be separate from the work we do?
I think it's one of those where it can be incorporated in. And Kai, you might be able to talk a little bit more about that with the upcoming transition to our new strength program that's going on. But you don't have to spend a ton of time on this to get the benefits from it. You could just devote 10 minutes of a strength and include that in the strength work that you're doing. It could be part of a warm-up. It could be at the end. you know, a lot of the times I have my athletes bring the cords with them just to the pool, and we'll tie it on to the end of a swim session. But what it does is it does obviously tie in very well to the strength, because we are working these very specific muscles. But it is one of those things where, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot of extra time. And if you, let's say if you're doing those 2 strength sessions a week, you also added in 10 minutes of the band work. I think that would be kind of a great way to complement those 2 things in there together. And like I said, with it, you don't have to just hammer away and do 5 times 1 minute and, you know, 10 times 30 seconds. You can focus on just the catch portion for a little bit. You can focus on just the finish part of it a little bit. I like to do sometimes some high tension 1-arm pulls. And with the high tension, it forces your body to be in correct position, because if you're not there, your body's not going to let you handle that cord in the right way under that high tension. But I think it is something that would fit very well into the strength training that we're doing. And again, if it's one of those things where you're time strapped and it doesn't fit onto that, you could always throw it in as a warm up for the swim session. You bring this to the pool. You do it as part of a warm-up before you get in. It allows you to focus on what you're going to do before you get in the water and feel those very specific motions, and where that elbow is going to be. What does that straight, non-breaking wrist look like coming down? Helps you kind of feel all those things.
That's excellent segue. That was actually part of the next question is, do you incorporate them into your actual swim workouts, or do you like them to be separate? And then how would you incorporate them? So you're talking about that just now.
Yeah, I'll go into that a little bit more detail. It kind of depends. Again, this is a time availability. I mean, if you do have 30 minutes where you can throw this in as a separate session, or let's say, you know, the pool availability right now, what we're seeing a lot of is people have to make reservations, and your reservation is for 30 minutes and you are in there and you are out of there. You know, normally you might be swimming for an hour. Now all of a sudden you're noticing you've only got 30 minutes. There could be a great way to pair these swims with the band. So you could get in 20 minutes of band work ahead of a 30-minute swim, and there you've got your full session. You know, or if you don't have that much time, again, or maybe you're lucky enough to say you do have a full hour or the full amount of time available, like I said, a quick 10 minutes before, focusing very specifically on things you want to work on in the pool that you can translate over, works very well. You know, I've got 1-to-1 athletes who are doing a little bit of both. And I think it's one of those things, even where I've got a couple athletes who have 15-yard pool in their backyard and they're doing some tether swims. We are pairing, you know, what can you do swimming on a tether, swimming in place, and pairing that with some band work. And it's one of those where, as you get back into it, you don't want to jump full on, all of a sudden go back to, well, I was swimming, you know, I was doing 3 swims a week. I was swimming an hour and 15 minutes for each one of those swims. You might not necessarily want to jump right back into that full on type of swim commitment right away. It's one of those things where we want to build back into it. And you'll see that with the return to swim build. So start out small and start out warming up and getting specific with the bands, finishing off a swim following that.
Excellent. That's all we have for right now. So you can continue on.
All right, excellent. So basically, you know, one of the things which you may have seen already is the return to swim program. So what we want to do is take what we've been doing with this band work and put it back into motion with some of these return to swim protocols that is going to be coming out. And return to swim protocol is basically a 3-week progression where, you know, we've been out of the pool for a lot of, you know, some people have been out since February, some people have been out since March, but the idea is we want to get back in the water. We don't want to overload anybody. We don't want to cause injury. Now, hopefully, if you've been staying up to or staying on top of these swim band sessions that we have been doing, you know, basically we've been creating these good habits with the swim bands. You know, we're going to be able to take this and translate this back into this return to swim, and where you'll see a little bit of some technical stuff. We'll try to get you to focus in on what you're doing on the stroke. And again, hopefully you will have felt that with the bands. And, you know, it starts out smaller. So again, you might want to you might even have more band heavy on the first week of that progression, and the bands back off as this return to swim protocol kind of kicks up a little bit. But the distance come up a little bit. You'll start to feel a little bit more familiar with what you're doing in the water. The feel's going to start to come back a little bit. And again, hopefully that very specific strength is still there. You know, I think ideally you get up in those 3 weeks to be able to start incorporating the regular swims if you're on squad right back into it. But I would use this protocol and pair it with the swim bands as a great way to keep that going and keep that coming into that. Kai, do you want me to talk a little bit more about the return to swim at this point, or do we want to wait on that a little bit?
Yeah, you can go into a little bit more detail on that, I think.
Okay, excellent. Pull up what I got here. So basically with the return to swim, we're bringing back some toys. We're bringing back the purple patch drill, some things like that where we can start to dial in the feel for the water a little bit more. I know if you were in squad, I know one thing that they wanted to mention is there's a couple different ways to implement that. One being there's a PDF that was emailed out in the Sunday special this last week. You could print off that PDF, bring it with you. The other thing is if you were dragging that into your today's plan library, you have to I think you can only do it 1 week at a time. And let's say it starts next week, you have to let your baseline plan load for that whole week first, and then overlay the swims on top of that. Because if you load the swims first, it will not, I believe the baseline plan will not load. So that's kind of the big important thing is let your week load, then drop the swims in on top of that. And obviously there's some time rich and some time starved, and it doesn't start out too crazy. I think even the first time rich, it's 1,800 to 2,500 yards. And it may be one of those things again, where as you may want to start out on the bigger end of that, and you may not be able to add much because again, you may be limited to pool time. I think the other big thing too is some people, and we'll open up the forum in the next couple days on more specifically on the return to swim. But one of the things we may see is people say, well, I see these return to swim protocol, but I can't swim in a pool. How do I translate this to open water? And that's one of the things we'll touch on in that, as I know that we're at that point now where some people can't get in a pool, but they're wanting to do swimming in open water. And, same thing with that as the pool. You don't want to jump in and do too much too soon with that open water. It was the same way when we entered the swim bands. I told a lot of people, it's like people all of a sudden panicked and thought, oh, I can't go to a pool. I'm going to do all the swim bands all the time. And it's like, no, this is going to wreck your shoulders. It's going to hurt really bad. It's not a good idea. Same thing going back to the pool. You don't want to think, well, my lake is 65 degrees now, I can go do this all the time. We don't want to just jump in and start doing, hour and a half sessions right off the bat. It's something where you've got to build into it. And again, I'll keep coming back to this. I think the swim bands are key as you're building back into a swim, keeping those in there. You may be able to taper them off a little bit. And then eventually we get to a point where you're back into more of a regular swimming routine, but hopefully now you're keeping those swim bands coming with you. I guess any quick questions about that?
None so far.
Okay. Well, I guess, we've covered a lot here with the bands. I think does anyone have any specific questions about the bands, about stuff maybe you weren't doing and that maybe I mentioned you thought maybe you should have been doing, technique-wise, ideas for adjusting what maybe some of the sessions have been doing. I can get a little bit more specific if people want on types of sessions you could be doing. If anyone is looking for that, I don't know. So if there's any questions along those lines, please fire them off.
Hi there, this is Enrique.
Hey, Enrique.
Yeah.
Quick question. A while back, I had suggested with Matt Hurley when he was talking about swimming in the swim bands, utilizing the little pacer, the metronome that you put up. Would that still be good, even though we're still doing 2-arm drills as opposed to any of the 1-arms, to kind of just keep that metronome going?
Yeah, I do like the idea of it for the single arm, when you're kind of mimicking a swim stroke. And part of that is I tend to find that I see when people start doing the swim bands, they get into this motion where they do 1 arm, other arm,
yeah,
arm, other arm. And the idea is we really want to try to replicate that rhythm of swimming. And it's a little bit different, but we want to get into that rhythm a little bit. And I think that I think you're talking about the tempo trainer comes in a little bit. It's obviously a little bit different with the double arm. It's more of if you were doing a butterfly stroke, so you'd almost have to half it more or less. You could. I tend to find with the double arm pulls, when I implement those, that with the double arm, I tend to focus more on a power stroke. So it's not so much the tempo I'm worried about with the double arm. It's more of a position, arm position, and power on the pull. Gotcha. With the single arm, I think it's more, we do some power stuff, but it's also more of let's find that rhythm. Let's find, that kind of, I guess the best word to say is rhythm. And with that tempo trainer, it helps dial it in. It's more of an endurance pace a lot of the time, but that I do with that. If anyone, Scott, who here has been on my swim band classes, a lot of the single arm stuff we do is like a 70 to 75% type of endurance. And that's where that tempo trainer would come in really well. So with the single arm stuff, yeah, you could with the double arm. Again, it's just finding the adjustment that works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And I notice in the swim workouts right now, we don't have any single arm. Is that correct? Have I missed?
In the ones that are in the squad baseline, I don't believe there's anything where it's just focusing on one arm at a time.
Correct.
That's something that you could add in on your own. I do that as kind of a in the swim band class a lot. The swim band classes that I've been doing are also in the on-demand library on the Education Hub. So it's one of those, if you are looking for a swim band session to do and you're kind of sick of the ones that you've seen in squad, you can go in there and grab any one of those, and they translate really well. And with those, I do them time-based. So it's one of those things, if you can put it on, you can get rid of the picture so you don't have to look at me, but just use the vocal cues, and we do it on a time base. So I'll say, 1 minute, here we go. And, 30 seconds to go. And you can kind of just listen and get the session in. And there are, we do stop a lot of the times and focus on technique and form and things and ways in which you can improve your technique while you're doing it.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
We have one from Mike about if you have access to a 15-yard pool, what kind of tether would you recommend? What kind of tools or toys, if you will, would he need to be successful in a pool like that?
Yeah. That's one of the things we've seen quite a bit is people that have we have people who have just a small swimming area available. And one of the same company I think that we recommend for the swim bands is this company Stretch Cords. They also make a swim tether. And likewise with the bands, I would recommend starting, if you're going to get the tether, it comes with a belt and it's got that same resistance. It's got a way to latch it on to something on the other end. I would recommend starting with a low resistance. If anyone kind of went into this and thought, I'm going to go for the red Stretch Cords, and you got that, and all of a sudden you realize they don't actually stretch all that much. You found yourself kind of really tight really soon. Go on the easy end, because same with the Stretch Cords. If there's too much stretch, you can always just wrap it around something a few times to reduce that stretch. But one of the things I like to do, if you've tried it, you've probably seen that it's hard to swim consistently for a long period. You kind of find yourself doing this back and forth thing a little bit. So I tend to do shorter intervals. I tend to do things where it's a little bit of drills. You're not putting a ton of force on it. But really with the tether, the main thing, it's about getting a feel back. So it's kind of just regaining that feel for the water. Toys that you could accompany, you could do anything with that. I think a big one is a snorkel for sure. A snorkel and the tether are great because you can just put that in, focus on what you're doing, and just try to keep that tether tight and not pulling you back too much. You could incorporate paddles into that as well, and kind of get that back going. And actually, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about earlier, and I forgot to, was paddle work. I think if you've been doing a lot of the swim band work over the last few months, and you're one of those people that was a little apprehensive about swim paddles getting back into swimming, this might be a good time to start introducing them a little bit. What we're doing is the swim bands are very specific shoulder strength. So if paddles were something that bothered you a little bit going into this, you could give the paddles another try. I start small, just like with swim band stuff. You want little resistance. With paddles, start with little paddles, because again, it's little resistance. You will notice they put quite a bit of strain, and paddles are not for everybody. There's some people whose shoulders they can't handle that. But if you've been hitting this pretty religiously, I think that it does translate pretty well into some paddle work as well. So it could be a good opportunity to try that.
I have a question. Can I butt in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I've started to swim again, and well, I find that when I'm doing the paddles, if it gets like really hard, I tend to sort of like grunt, and not the paddles, the band, sorry, and sort of like squeeze my stomach muscles, when you're using strength. And I train with Matt Hurley, and he, we're trying to fix my swim, and when videos in the past, often he said that one of the problems was that I wasn't, there was no force in my catch, so I wasn't sort of like, my arm was just kind of passing through and not using force. And with the bands, sometimes, you have to kind of grunt and, like squeeze your stomach muscles just to use that force. And now I find that when I'm going in the water, sometimes I'm trying to apply force. And sometimes I have that same thing where I sort of like, have to squeeze. Sorry, my kids are around. I have to use the force and press my stomach muscles. But I'm finding that my legs are sinking. I don't know if it's related. And lately, for some reason, I feel like I am using a little more force in my catch and my stroke, but my legs are sinking. And I don't know what I can do to try to work on that and improve that. I have buoyancy shorts, but I tend to not use them because I feel like it's a crutch. Like I tend to use them only if I'm very tired or something like that.
It is, in one respect, buoyancy shorts or a pull buoy or an empty any buoy could be a crutch, but the other time it forces good body position and you kind of get a little bit of that muscle memory. Interesting that the legs are sinking as you're tightening your core, because that's one of the things I will say to people if their legs are sinking is you need to tighten that core up a little bit to try to get the legs up. It could be a rotational thing. One of the things we've talked about with all the swim bands, and you've probably heard me say it in the sessions, is when we do it, I say, tight core, but stay square as we do it. When we're in the pool though, we're not swimming flat and going from one side to the other side. You're swimming from here to here. It's a side to side motion. So it could be a bit of a rotational issue where you really want to make sure that your hips are getting in on that rotation. And that comes in with the finishing of the stroke a little bit. So as you finish through here, when we do it with the stretch cords, we're very flat. So if you stay flat swimming, you're going to lose that rotation and your hips are going to sink a little. But when we're swimming, that finish should literally, as your hand comes by, you can kind of see it pushes your hips and opens them up a little bit. And if you get into that, sorry guys, the sun is killing me, that side to side, you'll notice that it helps bring your legs up a little bit. So I would really try to make sure that the rotation is there, particularly in your hips. It's one thing with the shoulders, but make sure the hips are following, and that helps keep the legs up.
Okay, thanks. I'll work on that tomorrow when I get water. Because I have been trying to rotate more as well, but I'm focusing more on the shoulders. So I'll work on the hips.
Yeah, and the big thing is that sometimes you can get into the shoulders, and when the hips stay flat, the hips sink, and you got to keep the hips engaged to keep the lower half up a little bit as well. And don't be afraid to try it a few times with the buoyancy shorts, and then try it without, and go back and forth with that. Don't be too afraid of them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was wondering about where in the shoulder would it be good to have more stability, whereas where to have more flexibility? Just because I do, like, my actual capsule is hypermobile, but I want to keep that nice and stable while also having the flexibility I need for swimming.
Well, I think it's that combination, right? Where we're trying to find, we want maximum flexibility, but we want to have the strength that one supports that flexibility and allows you to use it within the swim stroke. So I'm not really sure how to say where to build specific strength within the shoulder. I mean, if we've been doing the bands, that's still there. I think it's one of those where we try to build the strength within the shoulders. Swim bands obviously get very specific to swim stroke or swim strength. But at the same time, we don't want to lose that flexibility, because you'll see one of the things I see with swimmers a lot is when they are swimming, like we're talking about swimming flat and not moving, or they're doing the hand placement, it's because there's a lot of shoulder flexibility that's lacking. So the big thing is keep that shoulder flexibility there, but then if the strength increases, I don't think you're necessarily going to lose that. And I don't think by having more flexibility, you're limiting the strength you're able to build. So I would say, keep trying to build that shoulder strength. And that's one of the things too with the dry land, why we want to keep this incorporated, is we want to keep that mobility and that very specific strength in there. It's easy to just kind of lock up and swim here. So keep working on that mobility. But if the strength there is as you build the strength, it should just incorporate itself right into that.
I will add to that.
Yeah.
You want to build not necessarily strength, but control. Right, because there's so little happening in the shoulder capsule where the bone sits in there. It's basically like this. It's like a golf ball on a tee is the best example of what's happening in the shoulder. Like there's not a lot of strength just inherently in there. So think about having reflexive strength, right? So when you're doing like push-ups are a bad example, but like walking push-ups, walking with your hands, it's making your shoulder stabilize itself in many different ranges of motion, and basically having all of the muscles around the joint working simultaneously and together reflexively to build control. Because strength is one thing, but control in different ranges of motion is really, that's the swimming aspect. Having control here and control here and control here, keeping it in good position.
That's actually a really helpful tip. So when I'm doing push-ups with Mike's program or with like other strength stuff, I'll just do walking push-ups and add a little bit that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and Kai, yeah, a perfect explanation right there. And it is, swimming is such a body awareness and such a control thing that if you don't have that control at any specific spot in that stroke, that is where you're going to find your elbow dropping or not able to finish that push all the way through at the end there. All right. Any other questions? Let's see.
Yeah, I actually answered Cliff privately,
Okay.
so that's.
Yep, excellent.
Now we'll add on Thursday, John's also going to be taking us through, and Matt, sort of all the tools and toys and things you can be using. We touched a little bit on them today, but all those very specific nuanced questions around this buoy, that buoy, this pull, that, like all that stuff, that's going to be what our Thursday office hours is about. So we're really going to, pun intended, dive into that topic really, really in depth.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get into the toys, and I think toys are always fun. And I think especially as we're coming back to swimming, like we were just talking about with the buoyancy shorts and not being afraid of it. I think it's one of those things where don't be afraid of it and don't shy away from this stuff. Particular things like buoyancy shorts, pull buoy, or empty any buoy. These are things that are going to force good body position, and I would rather we force good body position now and then adapt than just try to deal with poor body position because you don't want to use a pull buoy or something. You know, the snorkel is going to be really big on helping dial in that body position. And then, you know, we've got things like fins and any buoys and ankle band, everybody's favorite, all that fun stuff that would kind of slowly start to come back into play as we start swimming. And again, I think also, yeah, the forum will be open tomorrow. Is that tomorrow through Thursday, Kai?
Yep, tomorrow through like Tuesday and Wednesday, full day, all questions based on the Return to Swim program.
Yes, excellent. So yeah, we can definitely get into that in a lot more depth as well.
But yeah, if nothing else specifically on that, yeah, one more, Jess, go ahead.
Well, it's not urgent, but I was wondering about like your thoughts on the high elbow, or sorry, the vertical forearm versus the old S kind of swimming, and if just one is better for pretty well everyone, which is what you've been teaching, or if there are kind of different considerations.
I will I will almost always do the high elbow, high vertical forearm catch as opposed to the S. Because I find with the S, unless you've got a really good feel for the water, if you're doing this, and what Jess is talking about, let me kind of back up here a little so you can see, is when it's kind of goes back to almost, this is when I was learning to swim in the 80s, was they would teach you to make an S as you swim. So you do this stroke where you get your catch, and then you S your way through. What I find is the idea is that you're sculling and you're holding water. What a lot of people end up doing is when their hand starts to turn this way, they're just slipping. They're not actually holding any water. So for me, I find that if you work on that high vertical forearm, the idea being there is your paddle now extends from your hand. Now it's your fingertip up to your elbow. So you're trying to grab water with this whole mechanism here, right? And you're grabbing that water. And once you have a hold of it, and think of it, instead of your arm moving through the water, you're grabbing that water with your hand, and then you're moving your body over your hand. It's almost like your hand comes in, we drop, this is your anchor. So we're dropping the anchor, and then you're pulling your body over it. And this way, you're holding water all the way through. You're using this big paddle all the way until you're using just your hand, and that finish flip at the end. Obviously, it may work better for them to do the S. I tend to say that, and I think 90% of the time, maybe more, I've not seen that be as successful as people want it to be, and have emphasized that high vertical forearm. You can hold more water, it helps with rotation, and it's kind of, in my opinion, I think it's more beneficial to work towards that than worrying about with the S. The S also, people have a tendency to not implement it well, and by that I mean they're thinking about the motion and the elbow drops, and then you're holding water with just your hand as opposed to this whole forearm area.
I also have a question. All right. It's really basic swimming 101 kind of thing. The actual hand, I mean, just because I saw you right now, do you keep it like closed like that, like a spoon, or a little bit more open?
A little loose. Yeah, a little loose for sure. If you're clenching it together, it's less surface area, right? So you're slipping through a little bit more. Hands should be generally fairly relaxed as you come in, and it's almost your fingertips are just apart, just a little bit.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I did see a question on how to scale up the band workouts if needed. I mean, obviously, yeah, I think that is one of those things where you can scale them up. I think if you're on Squad, and you may have seen, I think one of the first ones that was in there was called Resilience. And that was one of those where I took it and made Resilience 2 and Resilience 3, which my one-to-one athlete here, Alexi, just did the last week and told me she hated me, I think, after that one. But essentially, yeah, what you can do is you can do it a bunch of different ways. I think that one goes up a ladder, include the down the ladder. If it's something where it's 20 right arm, 10 left arm, 30 right arm, 10 double arm, or something that you can add and do 20 single, 20 double, 30 single, 30 double. I wouldn't necessarily add time, in the sense that with the swim bands, anything over a minute is going to feel like a lot. 2 minutes is probably my maximum that I would have anybody go. And if I did have someone go 2 minutes, it would be a pretty relaxed kind of endurance that's focused on form type of thing. You can adapt those and grow them by adding more rounds, would probably be the best way to do it, as opposed to adding more time or more repetitions. So if, you're going for 2 minutes straight, I think that's probably close to 100 pulls. That might want to be your max. Then at that point, you're putting too much stress on your shoulder, too much strain on your shoulder, and you're also risking your form breaking down. So it's better to do more of a shorter interval and keep that form together than trying to go for longer. You might be worried about trying to get that endurance back, but it's the same thing when we're in the pool. We don't get in and train for a 2.4 mile swim by swimming 2.4 miles. We're doing 50s, we're doing 25s, we're doing 200s, we're doing shorter stuff to keep that form together and keep the effort a little bit higher. Same thing with the swim bands. You don't necessarily need to go for longer or more reps or more, more pulls. Just add the number of times you're going through it, perhaps.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, that can conclude it for this week's office hours. So first, I want to thank John for all the awesome, great information on all this stuff. And if you have more questions for John, you can definitely book a consult with him. I know he's like our swim guru. So if you have very swim specific questions, John is definitely the guy to go to. So you can book a consult on the Purple Patch website and go through that. If you have questions on the Return to Swim program, forum will be opened up tomorrow through Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we'll see everyone again in the morning for more specific work on tools and toys to be using as you're getting back in the pool. So thank you all for attending. Thank you again, John. And we will see you everyone again very soon.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening to me yap on forever. So thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.